So this session is about networks in business or in a business context, or how social networks might influence a business context. We have three speakers from very different backgrounds, I think, as well. The person to start today is Rick Allan. Go ahead.
Thanks, Allan. So I'm going to race through, as quickly as I can in 10 minutes, some examples of what Cisco's been doing with social networking. Cisco being a larger company with an interest in the internet, but social networking, as I'll explain, is something that's sort of been happening out there and coming into companies. I think it's quite an interesting dynamic that's been going on. So I want to cover three broad areas. One is internally what we're doing as a community to social network ourselves. Secondly, some of the things we've been doing externally, how we've been adapting social networking techniques to marketing, in particular looking at the case study of marketing a router, or a router, as my colleagues across the water would say, not something traditionally one applies social networking to. And finally, just to show some of the strategic direction. I'm kind of speaking as an outsider to my own employer here, so to sort of comment on the interest with which large companies like Cisco are taking social networking, to give you some sense of the direction and the investments that are being made. So just in terms of the drivers, this is a slide that my colleague Robert Pepper likes to use quite rightly, that shows the way in which technology drivers have shifted. Originally, all the big technology projects happened classically with a sort of germ of an idea in a university that then went off into the very high value money data center banking type organizations that are across the river from here, where they had the big bucks to spend on the big systems. They would go out into enterprises, and eventually they'd come out to service providers and go out to customers. What's been really interesting with social networking technology is it's kind of reversed some of that. It still kicks off in universities typically, but it's going out to the consumer. The consumer is picking this stuff up. Then the service providers are getting in on the act. They're saying our consumers want this. We're going to go out and spend some money on it. And then finally, it's reaching the enterprise. So a lot of social networking technology is a classic example of this reversal of the technology drivers. Although I'm also going to mention some video developments which still go in the classic direction. They're coming out of enterprise into consumer. This here is a map of the Debian, if people know Debian Linux flavor, their community. I couldn't find a map of the Cisco community, but we have our social network is 64,000 people scattered globally, but it would look something like this. This is quite typical for a large open source type project. I'm particularly interested that they have somebody in Antarctica, and they have somebody here in the middle of the Southern Ocean. I think probably reflecting the fact they have quite a large scientific community around research projects. So ours would look something like that without Antarctica and the Southern Ocean. But we are a 64,000 person network of individuals that have to get together and somehow coordinate to run a business. We use the tools avidly internally. The Cisco phrase is on the web. You arrive at the company and you say, where is anything? And they say it's on the web, and you spend quite a long time trying to find it. And if it's your pension, then you're 6 months later. But our use of the web is evolving rapidly precisely because of this dynamic. The consumer dynamic is driving back in. We're using the blog technology. We're using wikis, actually, quite poorly in the sense that we can't keep up with the demand. There are not enterprise wiki tools that are good enough in a sense for what we're trying to do with them. We're using rating systems. We're looking at things like Ciscopedia, which you can imagine what that does. C-Vision is our own internal YouTube. So you now, we're all quite nervous about it. I was at a meeting this week, and we want to do something on the environment, and we're sitting there and we've got a desktop webcam, and we're kind of going, we could just sort of use the webcam and then we can put it on C-Vision. Is that okay? And we're slightly nervous of it because we do wear suits, but we're sort of getting the idea, and the platforms are being put in place. We're looking at tagging. We're using Second Life a lot, and then one of the most interesting developments is the use of directory, where again you have the 64,000 people listed in a single directory. It doesn't tell you anything. It gives you a job description, a title. It means nothing. And what we're now doing is adding expertise, which is the first bit of building up a profile. We'll add groups, and essentially we will use a Facebook-type tool internally to allow these people to organize with each other, because they just can't find each other at the moment unless you know somebody who knows somebody. So, incredible explosion of internal tools. Blogs we've been using extensively. We're particularly interested now in something called connected urban development, which is the ability to achieve some of our environmental goals by the use of technology. And one technology that's really taken off within that framework is something called telepresence. Telepresence allows us to sit in front of a video screen. So this is our social networking. This is the way we do it. I had a meeting again last week where we had 8 centres around Europe wanting to have a green conversation. Those 8 centres came into one meeting in one room via the use of this very high definition video networking technology. And again, this is one which is following the classic route. It's currently in enterprise, but we expect it to come out to consumer in due course, and that's not going to be too long. But that's social networking technology for us. Above all is video-based technology. We've had to edit this one and update it due to recent changes. But of course, wonders of Photoshop, one can adjust to fit. In terms of the way that we approach the outer world as well, we've taken this network and built it out. So we have something called Cisco iPrize, where we're looking for billion-dollar opportunities, think small, but billion-dollar opportunities that will come from a community out there who will come up with new business ideas. So this is, again, taking that internal dynamism and sharing it with the world and saying, come along, give us your ideas, and you may get some money. Cisco employees are not allowed to apply for the iPrize. In terms of our external-facing stuff, we had something called the human network concept, which we launched last year. So everything that Cisco's been doing in marketing terms has been shifted to this human network approach. And that happened at the same time that our marketing strategy moved away from traditional media to the online world. And people will be aware that the anticipation, I think, now is some point towards the end of this year, the beginning of next, that UK ad spend online will exceed UK ad spend on television. I think it's already passed it in Sweden, but of the first major economies, it will be the UK. That's going to happen very shortly. Well, Cisco is kind of part of that trend. There was a realization that actually you get more value out of a lot of the online activity, and we framed it within this human network concept. So I'm going to touch on one case study, which is the launch of something really, really boring. We sell dull blue-green racks of Ethernet ports with fine printed fact sheets. That's our router products. We launched a new one called Aggregated Service Router, and the launch of this, which happened just last month, was completely different. I'm going to take through some of the elements of that. Again, a bit like in the political world, where if a politician does something online or does something in Second Life, as much as anything, what they want is the real-world coverage, as it were. They want the coverage in the mainstream media of the fact they did something online. Well, a lot of the impact of this was the mainstream media coverage of the stuff that we did online, but still, it shows a direction of travel. It's quite different. Again, it's very clearly based on this concept that social networking technology is going to come into businesses through the back door, and the technology itself is technology that is specifically designed to cope with some of the challenges that the social networking systems are posing. So the start of it was this thing called Network Uber Users, which is not about dull green boxes, but was about Easter bunnies and Father Christmases. And this was put out onto the net as a website, I think back in February. So it was a kind of long run-up saying something's going to happen in March. It's kind of interesting. You can click these things and interesting things will happen. And these are for people who want to use the net in an Uber fashion more than anyone's used the net before. We went on, we delivered a game. I love this. I'm sad, but I love this. So this is an online game to be spread virally, where that's actually a winged flying router. And what you have to do is fly around and do traffic prioritization by picking up all the voice over IP packets and delivering them before you pick up the video packets, and then the email packets last because they don't need to be prioritized. So you scoot around and do that. So this is all part of this sort of viral pre-launch. There was a Cisco support group for Uber user internet addicts on Facebook. Most of the 600 odd members of this, I understand, are Cisco employees, but it doesn't matter, it was there and the Washington Post wrote about it. So that's good. And then finally we had, of course, our Second Life presence, which will come alive. I want to show this because I just wanted to show, because we're going to be videoed, I thought it'd be great to show a video of me videoing myself in Second Life watching a video. Trying to kind of work out the ramifications of that. But you could go to the Second Life site, and there are some limitations about Second Life, and people will have different views about the technology. It's quite limited in terms of the audiences that you can pull together because of the structure of the system. It's quite limited in terms of some of the sort of slightly clunky functionality. But what Second Life does, which is an original concept, is the bringing together of the audience. The audience can interact with each other as well as interacting with the thing that you're showing them. Of course, I'm the only one there at this time, so I'm not interacting with anyone. And the other thing that Second Life does for a company that still does make big boxes is that we can see them in 3D. So you can actually go in there and walk around a device, and our technicians go in and show people the different parts of a router in the 3D environment in Second Life. So there's some characteristics of Second Life, whether or not it or something else eventually becomes the most significant platform. There are some characteristics of Second Life which are quite interesting for us. The good thing about this is once you're in it, it won't let you out of it. Is there a page down button? There we go. So, just the final bit, which is to show the direction of travel. Cisco back in 2005 bought a company called Scientific Atlanta. They're a set-top box manufacturer, which sounded boring, cable TV set-top boxes, but this has morphed into the service provider video technology group. And video is massive, video is monster, video is key to the way that people like to interact with each other. And so this investment, which was a large amount of money, was part of the direction of travel that we were clearly setting. We bought a company called Five Across, which is not Six Apart, who make movable type, but Five Across, again, was a social networking, a community building technology which has been wrapped up into something called the Media Solutions Group. And we bought a company called WebEx as well, who are a company that does, again, business level interaction and collaboration. All of that's a direction of travel. And then it's the very final point, because we're in the Ofcom building, is that what all of this means as well from a technology company's point of view is if you're going to have video, if you're going to interact in real time, and if you want multi-point, if you want the people who are interacting not just to interact all of us with one website, but to all interact with each other at the same time as interacting with a piece of content, then you need something a bit more like that, a bit more fibery than the copper that we've had to date. And maybe you need a bit of this, a bit of spectrum. But what we're going to see is a radical step change, we think, driven by social networking, driven by video, driven by real-time application into networks which have both quality and width. And we've traditionally thought a lot about network width, but now we need to think about both quality and width, and we see that transition happening shortly.
Great.
That's it.
Okay, so Ruth Ward will now, I think, talk a little bit also anecdotally about some of your experiences with social networking in Allan and Overy. Is that correct? But you.
Yeah, thank you. Typical presentation about technology, slight technical hitch with the slides. So you've just got me, and I hope that will do. But if you'd like to see some pretty pictures, because I'd majored on pictures rather than text in my slides, I'll make sure they're put on the website after the event. I work for a global professional services business, a law firm, a company that doesn't produce boxes, and the thought of viewing in 3D a lawyer in Second Life to check it out just doesn't bear thinking about. So a professional service business is all about its people, and you would think that, you know, the importance of communication and collaboration among those people and out with clients would mean that this was a natural setting for social networking and social tools in all their forms. I've been working in this area for the last 3 years, and my experience is that actually progress has been pretty slow in the professional services sector in terms of take-up. Perhaps reflecting on what we saw this morning, we shouldn't be surprised by that. But, you know, I believe, and I'm very passionate, that there's lots of benefit of professional services and other businesses engaging with this stuff. So what I'm going to do is talk a little bit about the experience of my firm, Allan and Overy, and what we have learnt by our work and our engagement with social tools and social networking over the last 3 years. I want to focus a little bit to kick off on culture, because apart from when your slides don't work, you know, this stuff is much more about the people than the technology, and certainly in terms of any business use, it is all about the people. So I don't know what your perception would be of a law firm or a lawyer, maybe me. I am a lawyer by background, if not in terms of day-to-day practice these days. If I put the mirror up, what do I see? Comfortable with formal communications. Maybe not a natural for quick change and innovation. Reserved, risk-averse. That's a gross generalisation and a personalisation at the same time, but there are definitely some cultural traits there which will be familiar to anybody who's dealt with lawyers and law firms. So a challenging setting for informal social networking and communication. A couple of additional challenges specific to the business I work for, Allan and Overy. First, we have a very, very strong collegiate culture. It's always been part of the firm and its success that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts, the individual partners, and that's obviously a very strong platform on which to build any kind of social interactivity. Secondly, we have a strong commitment to innovation, and that was part and parcel of us getting the go-ahead 3 years ago to begin some experimentation. What I'm going to do now is talk a little bit, just very quickly, about what we have done and some lessons that underpinned our success, and maybe which go a little way to also to explain why other businesses maybe haven't, made those initial steps, and maybe if they have, why they haven't achieved such success. 3 things really that underpinned the success of our project in this area. The first thing was being allowed to kick off with some experimentation in a business setting. I don't believe that the fact that you know Facebook means that you are more likely in a business setting to go, yeah, because on the strength of this morning, experience either directly or via one's children of Facebook may just send you running in the opposite direction. So it's really crucial for us that we were allowed to do some experimentation in a business setting. We started very small. It was experimentation, it wasn't a pilot. In businesses, people constantly call, pilots, which, things that are beginnings of a rollout, and if they don't go well, then you failed. So it's really important for us that we were allowed to just, put our toe in the water very tentatively. We started small, we grew organically, we nurtured, from my team, the early growth, and that was absolutely crucial to the success of what we've done. The second crucial aspect was that we worked with existing trusted communities. Now we engage out there on the internet with some employee blogs. Now we participate in online networks, including one, I think, in which Cisco's involved in, which is actually PAN, the legal sector. But initially we worked with trusted communities that were in existence and that we knew about, initially internally and then latterly with clients. And that was so crucial because, I speak at a lot of conferences on this area, and if it's a legal conference, I can guarantee you that everybody else will be talking about risk, and everybody else will be talking about blogging guidelines. And because we started with trusted communities, actually we were able to cut through in one swathe, people's concerns about the use of blogs and other social tools, and concerns about social networking out there on the internet. So immediately say, we're not talking about, Paris Hilton's prison blog here. We're not talking about Facebook. We're talking about things within an internal setting. And that, again, the second sort of crucial element which underpinned our early success. The third thing was making clear from the outset that it was all about business. When we were first starting out, we went off to visit the BBC, who at that time had done a lot of work internally with a guy who was there called Ewan Semple. And when we came back to our offices from White City, we didn't sort of say, well, look, there's a template we can just plug in here. Just as I imagine if we'd been out to Cisco, one of the other technology companies who were forging ahead at that time, we wouldn't have come back just with a simple switch-on model because our firm is different. And one of the things that we felt very strongly culturally was that we couldn't start out with, a site for the football team, the A&O Cricket Club, that actually in our cultural setting, our business setting, people wouldn't feel comfortable chatting in a more public way about things that were not directly work-related. Although they'll send 100 emails, but of course people falsely believe that emails are private. So from the very beginning, from our first 3 experimental sort of team spaces that we set up, we were clear up front that all the sites had to specify what their business objectives were. They all had defined business objectives, and they were sort of monitored and measured and supported in equal measures against those business objectives. And that's something that was crucially important. We don't have any chat rooms. We're only now, sort of 3 years down the line, moving beyond what I would describe as business teams into other sort of purely sort of social work networks like a network for parents or for alumni or things like that. You know, initially it was all around sites for project teams, work teams, other initiatives. So they're the three things that really characterised, I think, and really underpinned what we did. And you know, it makes it sound as though it was tremendously easy, and in fact for us it was, but there are lots of pitfalls for the unwary. You know, just dealing with people's scepticism, concerns about the use of these tools out there on the internet, getting past the jargon hurdle. There are lots and lots of hurdles. So where we are now, just to conclude, in 3 years we sort of moved beyond our initial experimentation, and we now have a very sort of rich and diverse network of these internal spaces, which all at the moment follow the same single experimental template. So they have a sort of group blog at their heart, they have wikis, they have RSS feeds coming in, they have elements of categorization and social tagging to aid navigation as well as a search. They generate alerts pushing out to the members of those sites, and they are all member-specific, huge variety in terms of the size, but they are all member-specific. Building on that, we have client communities. We have some specific wiki sites now to help our sort of knowledge creation, our know-how, and we also participate actively in a number of external networking sites. And we do have the thing which I normally tell people when I'm speaking at legal conferences or business service professional services conferences not to do, which is employee blogs. But they are quite their focus. They are some of our staff talking about what they do at our firm on our graduate recruitment side. But if we hadn't started where we did, and if we hadn't started small, and if we hadn't started internally where people feel safe, I don't think for a minute we'd be where we are now. So a little insight into how you can take the external tools, make them work in an internal setting. Some lessons, I think, that are applicable across all businesses, and certainly actually a sort of growth phase, which is not that different from what you've had at Cisco, though on a much smaller scale.
Thank you. Yeah, great.
So as a last presentation of the day, I have the advantage that I can give a kind of overview and position my presentation in context of what the others have said. So this morning, when I came in at the second presentation, it seemed to be all about the barbarians at the gate that we have to shield ourselves from. And after that, it went the emphasis turned more into how do we take advantage of this as a consumer product, or how do we protect the consumers? And then during this section you can see, well, there's these tools available, how can we incorporate them? Now, here I'm going to take yet another perspective, and that is, given these large social networks that are out there, how could you take advantage of them by partnering with them in some way or another? And I will argue that the way to do that is to approach them as a business. And there's reasons why you should do that, because they look increasingly like a business. So the ideas of this presentation have been informed by a series of discussions that we had at the Internet Institute on distributed problem solving, and those discussions between researchers from the Internet Institute, amongst others, and people from McKinsey. And the idea that one of us, Jean-Michel Dahl, who is a professor at Paris came up with in the end, is that really we're talking about a space of different problems that communities may solve if you see them as productive communities. So problems can either be exciting or they can be boring, they can be simple or complex. And then conceptualizing the space as like this, you see that for some parts, it's unlikely that communities will ever be productive, since it has no appeal to them. So you should leave it to the engineering firm who can be paid to work on it. Then others, sometimes you can split up your problem in easier sub-problems. So then you get into the realm of outsourcing. And if you then manage to get it to get it exciting, what you're splitting up in simple pieces, then you get into crowdsourcing. But then communities like Wikipedia have turned out to become a bit more complex in the process of their lifespan. And in those cases, you're dealing about communities dealing with challenges, and then more is needed. You can't just do outsourcing or crowdsourcing, you really need community engagement. So one of the other nice themes that was hinted upon in this session is this idea of people or organizations moving around this space. And I think you can very nicely see that in the case of Firefox, which started out as a private company. And then once they decided to go open source, the first thing they had to do in order to be successful is to make their code base more easily accessible, and open it up in the case that people would actually be able to understand and take ownership of single modules. But then Mozilla, which was created, took quite a while to get off. Actually, it appeared for years and years to not get off the ground at all. So it's only when Firefox emerged that you really get a successful project. So then the question is, what did Firefox change vis-a-vis the original Mozilla? And I think one of the key parts is that they managed to redefine their goals so as to be able to attract not only the Uber geek user, but also the more users with a wider interest to contribute to the browsing. So I think the story is quite clear for Firefox, but for Wikipedia, maybe a bit more difficult. Wikipedia as well started out as a kind of closed entity, Wikipedia. And this is their first logo. And at first they had great difficulties of attracting people, and that's mainly because it was so difficult to contribute anything, because you had to go through this slow reviewing process. So the first step of Wikipedia is simplification. And again, it's seen in the logo. The early success of Wikipedia, you can explain it simply by the fact that this wiki technology allowed it for many users to contribute and made it much more easier to edit articles. But then, as more and more people started editing articles, things turned quite complex again, because people didn't just start articles, they started fights with each other as well. And so there's this constant struggle between how complex should it be, how easy should it be. I'm sure we're already quite far down the line with the presentation, but this is what I'm going to talk about in the next few minutes. How has it changed? I think it's become more and more like a firm, but it's still not quite a firm. It's, let's call it a SOP. Why has it changed? Well, there's the successes and the failures. And well, the findings so far, research so far is very preliminary, but what we see so far seems to point out that maybe in order to be sustainable, Wikipedia practices need to change again. Okay. So Wikipedia as a firm, it is still the encyclopedia that anyone can edit. But you see these managerial types emerging. And what do? They boss people around. They issue directives, they convene task forces, and they set up projects. But still, of course, it is without pay. This graph over here shows the rise in the number of people who are more equal than others in Wikipedia. So these are people with an administrative status who have the right to delete a page, to block other users, and to, what's the other right? To protect a page from editing by the anonymous users. What you see over time, from only 40 in 2002, it rises to over 1,000 people with these kind of rights in 2007. And then if you look at the amount of activity that these people do, which is what the blue line is showing. At first it's quite moderate, but together with the growth of the number of administrators, the amount of people doing all this deleting and blocking increases as well. And it seems to be increasing faster than the number of administrators is rising themselves. So these busybodies are getting busier and busier themselves, up to the point where you get about 5,000 actions overall. So that's more than 4 every person a day on Wikipedia.
If you divide that by the number of pages, what does it look like?
Well, that's a point for future research, but that's definitely an open question, whether it's just about that, or I will get to that in a moment. So directives are the templates you see when you go up to many Wikipedia articles that tell you to do a certain thing. So you have stops that tell you, please expand the text. In one subcase, you have called Simple Wikipedia. You will see the template unsimple or complex, which basically tells the reader, please go and improve the readability of this page. In the Chinese Wikipedia, you get a template called regional, indicating that there is some concern about bias towards either mainland or Taiwanese point of view. And then there's a series of rewards that are taking place. That's human resources management. You can featuring articles and giving barn stars to users that perform well. Now this graph takes just one of these directives and shows its use over time. And it is quite limited. So this is the number of articles every month that you can that has been added that month that you can see that template. So you do see a rise from about 40 of those articles in 2004 to over 200 in 2007. These numbers compared to the millions of articles that you get in Wikipedia would seem quite limited. But then, judging on the amount of space they take up in the archive, they seem to be quite substantial. In that, I've just started analyzing the archive of Wikipedia, the current archive that contains all edits of all articles. And this article, this archive, if you decompress it, is 2.5 terabyte. And out of these 2.5 terabyte, these 1,500 pages that have ever been tagged as controversial will take up 200 gigabyte. So that's 10% for a tiny proportion of pages. Okay, and the last point, and we'll go over this quickly. You see, third element that you get projects being started, task forces being convened. Of course, the projects tend, whereas in business the project would be of limited duration, here they tend to be kind of infinite. But you can imagine that at some point people will pull the plug, and at that point the project is finished. So the question is then, what problem would this solve? Why would we see these features emerge? And one of the hypotheses is, like you pointed out, maybe it's just because of the growth, it's just peripheral activities that were always there and they're just becoming more visible given that we have millions of pages. But the other thing, you could also think, well, maybe this is a phase transition. We're getting into a new phase where early Wikipedia was just all about aggregating content. And now what all these directives are showing is that Wikipedia as a whole is moving into a phase where it's more about integration. And once you start integrating, you need more coordination. And then the last hypothesis would be the kind of barbarians at the gate. The fact that Wikipedia has become much more visible attracts all these vandals, and all these vandals have to be policed at one point or another. Or maybe even not vandals, but just clueless editors. And once we understand why, the question is also, to what effect? Does it work or not? So this graph here shows a pilot study on simple Wikipedia, where the express goal was to produce articles, an encyclopedia that is relatively easy to read. So if you then go on and measure the readability of overall readability of articles using some old standard statistical measurement, you see that actually over time, whereas first they kind of managed to keep their encyclopedia readable, over time it slowly goes down. So slowly this goal remains elusive. And even though in simple Wikipedia is also a prime case where all these kind of organizational innovations have been going on. So you do see at a micro level that these directives appear on pages, and if you then look at what happens at those particular pages, in many cases it seems to work, and that the readability of those pages then improves. But overall, it doesn't seem to have any effect. So future research would be to extend this to Wikipedia as a whole, looking at the quality, what has been the effect of organizational changes, and more crucially, how could you help it? Where can you find more automation to improve the matters? Where maybe would you be able to introduce paid labor, as has been happening in the case of Firefox, where actually you do get in certain areas people being paid to fix certain issues. And the way I hope to carry out this research is with help of the National Grid Service, since this is 2.5 terabytes to analyze. Finally, some pointed to further reading. The preliminary version of this paper is out there on the net. You get it from there. And if you just want to have some more background reading on Wikipedia, I find this two very nice contrasting accounts of Wikipedia. Nicholson Baker on the state of Wikipedia right now, and Marston on the early stages. And it's really interesting to see how at first it was all about openness, and nowadays it's all about voids and fighting each other, and almost like as if you were in an office.
Thank you, Matthijs. Okay, thank you, Matthijs. We'll have the two panelists, if they want to come up here so that you can sit near the microphone. Bill Dutton from the Oxford Internet Institute, who you've seen before today, and Nathan Marston from McKinsey have agreed to give some comments on these presentations. Do you want to start, Nathan?
Sure. So thank you for hosting it. I appreciate the invitation to be here. Fascinating presentations, I think, for participants. Three things occurred to me as I was listening. One is around the challenge in these social networking is to find the kernel of demand that exists within a business organization, or the thing that allows your people to want to collaborate. I was struck particularly by the discussion of a legal professional services institution. Coming from a professional services institution myself, how do you find a way to get over the risk-averse nature of sharing information that could end up in the public domain? I think it's fascinating, and I love the idea of starting small and building. On the Cisco side, I noticed you mentioned there's a huge demand already, but the tools themselves are just insufficient for what you want to do. So I'd love to understand this dichotomy here. It doesn't feel to me like you have a tool problem at the professional service level, but you do. And so what is that problem that you experience with these wikis that are enterprise, not enterprise ready? The final piece, a lot of my work is in organization design, so I'm fascinated by the idea of, do individual organizations or humans feel the need for hierarchy? Do they actually want to create this organization because it is a felt need, or is it because there is a need to do it to create the purpose? And I'll be honest, I don't really know what the answer to that is. I wonder if social networks themselves face the same kind of scale problems that organizations face. So if you put 60 people, or roughly more than 60 people together in an organization, you start to need some sort of hierarchy or some sort of mechanism to control purpose and direction. I think that limit's a lot higher for social networking, but I wonder whether you're starting to see that limit start to play out. If a large number of individuals have micro-transactions to create an organization, I wonder where the scale limit is to actually create meaningful purpose in a social network. And I wonder if Wikipedia now is facing a phase of more purposeful development. That's what's starting to cause their struggle. So these are just some thoughts. I think this is a debate that we won't finish, but a good one to start.
Bill, do you want to go with your comments?
Yeah, very briefly. I don't think you planned it this way, but absolutely amazing collision of these presentations, where a number of the people in organizations, law firms, high technology companies, are developing wiki-like things and collaborative networks within their own internal mechanisms. And then you see one of the most famous collaborative organizations, Wikipedia, adopting management strategies to solve its problems. I think the one element that ties both together and will make them very different than anything you've done before is that from our studies with colleagues is that it's down to individual choice. And when I keep going back to the early PC revolution in organizations, when people came into an organization with their PC, and the organization would say, leave your PC home, we have microcomputers, we have our own spreadsheets, don't come in here with a toy and have your own spreadsheet out on the table. They didn't. People brought in their own PCs and they created their own spreadsheets, and it created a real revolution in the office in terms of the decentralization of information. Likewise, people in Cisco and people in Allan and Overy, I bet dollars to donuts that some of them are connected to Wikipedia and many other organizations, and they're contributing to organizations that are well beyond your boundaries. And so I think that's fascinating, but it's down to individuals deciding on their own terms whether or not to network. And so you have less control than you may have in the past of essentially who they contribute to and what products they are contributing to. Likewise, Wikipedia, they are not paid. They decide to contribute to Wikipedia. And so despite the fact that they are trying to manage networked individuals, there's a limit because people can enter and exit at whim. Most people are not paid at all, and their loyalty is based upon whether they think they're contributing to something in a useful way. So I think the fact that we're talking about managing networked individuals, and it's a very different phenomena enabled by new technology, and I think it's right that firms try to exploit that technology because something's going on here that's very important. But I also think, and it's right that what I call collaborative network organizations try to exploit management strategies to better control these networks. But I think they will be fundamentally different because of that individual control. I mean, even I've issued directives in my organization. They're not very effective. You don't issue directives, and directives don't work, so, and I think, anyway, but I'll end there. I think it's a fascinating convergence of the two talks, but I think it is a fundamentally different phenomena we're talking about.
Did you want to react to that immediately?
Yeah, just to pick up first on the point about what's difficult in a corporate environment, the big problem is access control. Is that most of the tools are designed for kind of pretty much open access. As soon as you move into a corporate environment, you nearly always, for one reason or another, have to put a layer of access control, and that causes the problem. So we have multiple wikis, some of which are open to everybody in Cisco and some of which are private, but just that layer of access control, policing it, managing it, is just a nightmare compared with, here's Wikimedia, media wiki put up somewhere and just go for it. So I find that tends to be the problem with the access control issue. And then just picking up the point about really the sort of communities that are involved in it. I think there's a fascinating area for study. Probably Facebook is the great case study where you go, so Facebook starts with these university communities who kind of have a reasonable assumption that they all know each other. So they have one set of social norms. And they have all sorts of issues in common. So that's more like the Cisco community. We all have things in common, and we all have reasonable assumptions about sort of the control of the community. And then you take that sort of tool and then you put it into the completely open environment, and people behave quite differently, respond quite differently. So this question of sort of gatekeeping who comes into a community, I think is fascinating. I think there's a lot more there, because some of the assumptions you make about hierarchy, if the community is gatekept effectively, if Match.com gatekeep all the people who sign up to that site, they don't need to do so much micromanagement. But sites where everybody can come and play, you probably feel you need to do, in a weird way, the more open it is, the more management you need to do, if that doesn't sound insane.
Yeah.
Just to pick up, I can't tell you how reassuring it was for me to understand that Cisco has problems with its technology.
With other people's technology.
Because having said, having said during my presentation that this was all about people and not all about technology, of course the tools are crucial. And I just really wanted to pick up on Bill's point about availability and control. I think this whole area, actually in a business setting, is ripe for some research. I'm not conscious of any, and I know that we had all sorts of researchers speaking this morning, but we haven't really been researching, we've just been living it over the last few years. And, I don't think it's the case that everybody who has used, been part of the Magdalen College Facebook community expects when they join A&O that they will have access in the same way. But there is a much greater awareness of technology that's out there that might be useful in the day job, and looking 5 years ago, looking longer than that, somebody joining a law firm wouldn't say, oh well, I've used a document management system before, and yours doesn't really match up. Whereas now, if you haven't got a kind of wiki solution, if you haven't got a kind of networking solution, and you are a major graduate recruit, your graduate recruits will be saying, well, why don't you have this? Because it would be really useful. And if you have one and it doesn't match up to the way that Wikipedia works, then it's just not good enough. My firm shut down access to Facebook very briefly on network grounds, and it reopened it very quickly. And there's no plan to stop people accessing and making full use of all the information, other resources that they have available to them on the internet. But I know from a conference I was speaking at only last week that a lot of law and other firms do ban Facebook, whether or not successfully or not. And so just to go back to my first point, I think this is actually a very interesting area, this area of access and control. And that's why, our experience in terms of learning by doing and building that confidence has just been so great, because actually we can push back to anybody and say, well, look, don't read everything you read in the metro on the way to work, because actually this stuff is very useful.
I was asked, my name's Meg Pickard, by the way, I'm from The Guardian. I'm not here in a reporting capacity, I'm here in a listening capacity, which is what I've been doing most of today, and it's been sitting on my hands, or rather trying to keep my mouth shut, not to say things during the day, but I think we'll all agree that it's been a really fascinating day for lots of sort of stimulating presentations and lots of questions, lots of things to think about. So I was asked to kind of to listen and then to sort of report back at the end of the day about some of the things that we've heard and trying to put them into some context. I'm sure that everybody in this room could do just as good a job as me, if not better, but bear with me, and I do realise it's the end of the day and we all need tea. So, through today we've heard a lot about different kinds of social networking services. We've heard about identity-based social networking things like Facebook. We've heard about interest-based kind of activities, and we've heard about those social networking services which cross the two, like dating sites, where people are giving out bits of identity in order to be able to, and share common interests in order to find the centre of that Venn diagram, the bit that actually suits them best of all. We've also heard a lot about different groups using the internet and social networking services, and how their usages differ and are similar. So we've heard a lot about young people, older people, I think that probably includes me, although I never know these days, personal and business usage, and how some of those are very different kind of usages, and some of them actually tend to overlap much more than we might expect. But we've also heard about why people are using it, what's driving people to use social networking sites, what they're using it for, and the three kind of big things that came out were, which we all knew, I think, coming into the room, to communicate, to construct or express or play with identity, and to collaborate, build and strengthen relationships. So of all of the conversations that we've had today, I've lit upon, I think there's 10, I lost count somewhere, but 10 brief points that I wanted to sort of pull out are either of things that I thought were particularly noteworthy or particularly worth maybe having extra conversations around, or maybe that haven't been mentioned, but I sort of think that this is something that people are talking about elsewhere. Certainly in my research, I should sort of caveat this with, as well as working for The Guardian, I've about 12 years ago I did some research into online communities, so you could say that the last 12 years of working online have been very deeply embedded participant observation. I think that's how I'm going to call it. So the first thing is that the concepts of virtual and personal and privacy and so on, all the boundaries and definitions are changing. People, there was a great phrase before. Someone said, people will barter some information for experience or for enhanced experience or access. The idea of jam today, and also the idea that your social networking profile is not this thing that completely lives divorced from reality, that it's actually an extension of reality, both in terms of who you are and how you express that, but also in terms of the way that it extends your activities, it extends your everyday activities. So it's not, this whole concept of virtual networking and virtual community. It's actually real community, but in a digital space, and there's something there that's actually, it's not pretend, it's real, and just as when people are meeting on Match.com or whatever, they're not pretend people, it's actually real people. You could even extend that to saying, when people create representations of themselves in Second Life, there's an argument that says that actually the representation that someone chooses to adopt in Second Life, even if it looks a little bit like a Playboy bunny, is actually in some ways hyper-real, because it's what they see themselves to be, or what they would like to be considered, or how they feel on the inside. And I know that we all do some element of curation or editing when we put together our social networking profiles, whether it's by construction, I'm 6'5" or whatever, or whether it's by omission, I'm just not going to mention that small fact that I work for X company or whatever. The second thing is that this idea of reconfiguring access, which came up again and again through the day, that the web and social networking services are specifically reconfiguring social access socially to, most specifically, to who you know and to who they know. So there was another great phrase that people are being more exposed to a more diverse array of people, both socially and also in business. And that reminded me of Ron Burt's theory of structural holes, which some of you may know. The idea that people with more open networks are more likely to succeed in innovation, or more likely to be more innovative, which sounds like a sort of truism, but he's done some really interesting work in that. And that sort of reminded me of a conversation, actually technically an argument that I had with somebody a couple of days ago, who worked with me at a company that I used to work. I worked for AOL for about 10 years. Who friended me on, or made a contact with me on LinkedIn, and then I said, no, actually, I don't, I never worked with you, we just worked for the same company. And we had sort of several email exchanges going backwards and forwards, him saying, well, you're just limiting the scale of your network, you're limiting the potential of your network, and by not making friends with me, you're making it very difficult to create network opportunities in the future. And I was saying, yes, but I can vouch personally for every single person within my LinkedIn network. And so, there's a big question there, and I think it's a wider question, not just about rather pushy people on LinkedIn, but actually also about, the difference between quantity and quality of networks, and what does that, what are people doing when they're creating Facebook friends, and what does friends actually mean in a world in which you'll all go home and you'll all start sending friend requests to each other. Maybe this is the first time you've met. So there's a sort of question there. The third thing is that we are obviously learning every day about the way that the ways that people are using social networking services, both on their own and in groups. I was interested in the concept of tribes and this sort of conversation around cyber tribes that came up. But I also think that it's worth pushing that further and saying, that actually thinking about communities and the way that communities work together, and again this idea of it, the difference between a cyber and a real kind of equivalent, that actually there isn't necessarily that much difference in the way that people group together and come together either to collaborate or to organise or to solve very personal issues. So people working together with a group in order to solve a very personal thing for themselves. Education is a good example of that. Or whether it's actually, some people participate in tribes or in social activity online for noble pursuits, and sometimes it's about fame or about acquisition or about, look at the huge array of LinkedIn contacts that I have, and what does that say about me? I must be really special. But I'm sort of interested in this, that we don't just think about online usage and people using online as victims waiting to happen, but really, about the power of those communities and the power of social activity online, and specifically when people identify each other and then potentially work together for good or to make positive changes. I think that's worth some more investigation. Next up, that all of the changes and the learnings that we have challenge us to really rethink some of the definitions I mentioned before, privacy, but also rethink the definitions of identity, of trust that was mentioned just now, the idea of community. I mean, a community gives. The old use of community is the idea of, kind of a bunch of people having a big group hug and knowing each other's names and borrowing sugar from each other. And actually, the new form of community is much more loosely joined. It's much more about exchanging business cards or exchanging virtual, contacts and being able to nod at each other in the street and kind of, I know that person, we've never talked, but I do know you, that. And there's an interesting sort of idea of what is community in those worlds. But also the idea of transparency. There was, again, a sort of phrase around young people have a greater access and granular control of stuff. So despite the fact that we think about social networking services as being these control-free zones, actually, or that people are giving up a lot of control, actually there's a lot more granularity there. There's a lot more possibility. If people do it, it's possible to have incredibly fine control over a lot of different experiences. And that also means that the expectations are higher, and it holds people to a higher account about where is my information being kept, what information is available. And so I was again interested in the Cybertribes presentation. There was the example of Sarkozy, and and he told someone to get lost, and then the video was on YouTube, and that was used as an example of somebody who was the way that the internet was being used. The detractors were using the internet in order to make a point. I might be being naive. I look at it the other way around and saying, actually, it's a way of keeping him honest. It's a way of, in a world before YouTube, we wouldn't know that Sarkozy had been rude to a member of the public. And actually, it's a way of increasing transparency. And so I'm sort of quite inspired by a lot of the work that's being done by companies or by organisations like My Society around holding MPs to account via digital their digital trails, their digital information trails, and using the power of socialness online in order to kind of unlock that. I'm going to whip through the rest. Very big point made that the code isn't mature, that the tools aren't ready yet, that we need to build capability. And I would argue that we add to that and say, yes, but neither are the users very mature in a lot of ways. And I don't mean they're young. I mean that, we just don't know what everyone's doing yet, that actually it's too early to tell in a lot of cases. So I don't want to say that anybody's research is not valid, but more like actually we're only just starting to see the trends. We've only just begun in a lot of ways with social networking services, especially that every new wave of technological innovation and economic development brings new opportunities and new challenges, and in many cases, we sort of see cycles in that. I think if anyone knows Gartner's hype cycle, that's probably an interesting model to look or to think not just about technology adoption, but actually to think about maybe social networking adoption, and that I wonder whether the moral panic in some ways is associated, that the stuff that we read in the Metro, about Facebook's going to ruin our lives or rule our lives or whatever, whether some of that's actually associated in the Gartner hype cycle. There's a sort of a really exciting peak, and then there's a big trough of disillusionment before it starts picking up again when people find personal utility. And I wonder whether, the moral panic is associated with the trough of disillusionment in some ways. Another point, I can't remember what number I've got to, is that the bogeyman does exist, absolutely, but the greater threat might actually be from your social graph or your wife. Or yourself, actually, that it's not just about the sort of evil people that are somewhere over there that might be a problem. It's the people that who might inadvertently disclose information. That's not just in things like Facebook. It's also something really simple. If you know Twitter, the service, and you can have public or private Twitter settings, but there's a sort of fundamental disconnect between Twitter. If I'm private and you're public, and I say, I'm pregnant, but don't tell anyone. I'm not, by the way. But if I said something and you said, congratulations, Meg, on, you're making a public announcement in response to a private confession or a private, so there's a disconnect there, which is actually, I have more to fear from people I know than from people I don't. It's not the bogeyman. And also from the organizations that you trust. I'm brought to mind the idea of friendly stalking, and, that I don't think it's always about your exes trying to gang up to find you. It's sometimes about keeping in touch, but at arm's length, with people. So reconnect using Facebook and services like that to reconnect with people that you know but you don't want to have a daily relationship with, but you want to sort of spy on them in a nice way so that you've got something to talk about later. I have that relationship with a lot of my Facebook friends, and I'm sorry if they're watching, but I'm sure they have the same with me. Nearly lastly, I'm struck that pretty much, a lot of what we've discussed today actually seems quite passive. It seems like a very like it's all been about consumption and the way that people consume the internet and consume their social activities and so on. I think that we're finding new ways to engage with the web and with each other, and each of those have different kind of skills and permissions associated with them. So rather than just all being about consumption, I think we're also learning quite a lot about curation and the way that people are curating activities on the web. I look at Facebook, to come back for that for an example, or MySpace's top 8 friend functionality is a pure act of curation. Having to choose which your 8 your favourite friends are is really fascinating, and I think curation is going to be one of the big things that we sort of see coming next, rather than just joining up. It's about what you do with those networks. And also, that all of the stuff that we read about in Metro, the social networking services, the big ones, are just the tip of the social internet iceberg. There's actually a lot more stealth social activities going on. We've heard mention of blogs, and we've had a lot of conversation about MySpace and about Bebo and Facebook and the big boys. But actually, there's a lot more social activity that's going on around tagging and ratings, and Delicious is a great example of it's not social, it's not, we call it social bookmarking, but it's really personal bookmarking in a social space. And so there's a question there, or there's sort of not quite a disconnect, but there's a really interesting tension about what is public and what is private, and what am I happy performing in a social space or performing in a public space in order for people to get benefit from my activities, which is your example with bookmarks. And finally, I think, apart from noting that I clearly need to be monitoring my husband's use of the web a bit more, except he's usually in his study IMing me and mine, so I'm not sure really what that says about our relationship. But actually, that the use of social networking services isn't about mass use of big names. And just as I can't generalize and say, here's all of the tidy things that we have agreed on today, we haven't agreed on anything today, we've had conversations. It's not just about the bulk stuff, it's and the big names that we have heard of. You might as well talk about the social use of London. I was thinking about that before, the London, the social space. It's sort of it would be a very long research project, I think. But it increasingly is about the power of niche, and that was mentioned before. I was struck in the Cisco example with the Facebook group on for Uber internet addicts. It's a very, if you are one, you know it, and if you are one, you know it, and that's the group that you will join. Partly because it's a product launch, and partly because actually you might get utility from finding networks of other people who have the same problems as you. Hyper niche also means hyper relevant, and in the case of something like Match, that would be really helpful. The fact is, that you've got a big long laundry list of what you want to find in a potential partner, and actually being exposed potentially to 6 million potential dates is not very useful. Being exposed to 6 really high quality dates, or 6, not lying, 6 well rated dates. I'm sure that would be the way it works. Do you do date rating on yeah, okay, we'll talk about that later. But it's this idea that increasingly mass use of social internet is not about a big homogenous kind of lump of people. It's about niche plus niche plus niche plus niche, and increasingly, I've edited precisely one Wikipedia article in my time. I don't have one myself, but I've edited one, and I'm not an admin. And the reason that I edited it is because I knew one thing, and it wasn't on the page about the thing that I was looking up, and so I added that thing. And actually, that's a really kind of an interesting example of niche, or of niche information, niche knowledge, or making something very relevant. It's not always about, I would never dream of saying I will write an encyclopedia, but I can tell you something very specific about the small town where I was born, and that's sort of, if everybody adds a little bit of the information that they know about their specific circumstances, then actually that gives us a much broader social view. So I think that's sort of everything. There you go. Thank you very much.
Okay, and up to you.
Thank you very much, Meg. That was outstanding. In fact, as a rating mechanism, it would just be. I was hoping that you would give me the answer to the question I've been figuring out all day, which is, having spent a whole day talking about social networking, what do I say to my 9-year-old daughter I have learned that is relevant to her experience on Club Penguin? And I think that probably the answer is that learn to tell the difference between a friend and an extension of your network effect. An extension of your network effect is probably the kind of individual who would steal your password and get you banned from the network, whereas a friend would never do a thing like that. Thank you very much to the Oxford Internet Institute for all of the many inputs that you've made to today's event. Thank you to everybody who came along and made a presentation, who came along and challenged a presentation or debated a presentation. I hope you found this of as much interest as I have. Ofcom plays a funny old role with regard to anything to do with the internet, which is to say that we're fascinated by it, but we have to put our regulatory hats at the door as we enter the room to have a discussion about the internet. We do try to add to the research and evidence base that all of you people and many others are able to draw on in developing your theories and ideas. So I hope you found it useful. Thank you for coming, and have a safe journey wherever you're going on to next.